We are living now in a time with corona, with a pandemic in Western Europe. Actually, in the Middle Ages, we had another pandemic which was much, much worse. In the middle of the 14th century, the big plague came to Western Europe. The pestilence, the pandemic. It started probably in Central Asia, not in China, but in Central Asia. And then it followed the Silk Road and came to the Crimean Peninsula in the winter 1347, and then it spread very fast to southern Italy, northern Italy, France the next year, and already in 1349 it had come to England, to Scandinavia, and even to Sweden and Finland. It was extremely contagious and it was extremely deadly. The first symptoms was people got headache, they got stiff limbs, they were cold, they got very bad stomach. I mean, something like people know from after vapor, or the same symptoms as you have now with corona. You could have the disease for a week before you got the symptoms, and then most people died the next day. Some actually lasted 2 days. We don't know exactly how many died, but maybe 1/3, probably rather half of the population in certain areas in Western Europe. It spread first and foremost by breathing, when people were coughing, and then it may also have been spreading via rats and lice and small animals. It started in 1347 in Western Europe, and then it came back again and again, actually until around 1800. There may be a connection between climate and this big plague, in the sense that in certain years the climate was very good, and then there were an explosion of small animals on the steppes of Central Asia, small rodents, rats and whatever, and they produced a new variation of this plague, which then spread and came to Western Europe 10-15 years later. We do have some numbers of people dying in 1348-49. For 1 year, 500 persons died in Paris every day. Or we have another example from Siena, where the city council made mass graves. They were digging all the time and dropping down dead bodies, covering it with a small layer of earth, of soil, and then started digging new mass graves. Allegedly, about 80,000 people died in Siena, only in one Italian city, at a time when the population was much, much smaller than it is today. If you compare to corona, it's impossible. This was a catastrophe on a scale that changed society totally. In the Middle Ages, of course, people knew that this disease was transmitted by breathing, by coughing, and that it could lie somewhere in the clothes. So the first thing you did in most cities was simply to isolate people, to make quarantine. Venezia was probably the first city that ordered that people coming to Venezia on ship should wait in the harbor for 40 days before they were allowed to come on land. In many cities you simply closed people in the houses. If they started coughing, if they started dying, you would put up boards and close the doors and the windows, and then you would feed them through small holes. Other cities did exactly like the Nordic countries, Finland and Norway and Denmark. They closed the borders. You could not come in and out in the cities unless you had a very important purpose. It spread and also came to Scandinavia in the 14th century. We have so few sources from Sweden and Finland from the Middle Ages, but we have small glimpses. Magnus Eriksson, the king in Sweden, Finland, in 1349 sent out a letter to the churches. Now you have to pray to God to stop this pestilence in our countries. It's interesting the context, what happened to society. It closed down to some extent. You tried to close down, to lock down society also in the middle of the 14th century. If we look at the consequences in a broader perspective, we can see that it changed a lot in the economy, because suddenly 1/3 of the labor force had disappeared. What do you do afterwards? Well, actually there were two strategies. In Eastern Europe, you return to the old system, the old kind of agriculture, and then you pressed people to stand on the land. You pressed people to stay on the land and continue tilting it. So you got a much more bound labor force, an unfree labor force in Eastern Europe. While in Western Europe, there was a reorganization of the economy. People started thinking in a different way. How do we produce? How do we make society working again? So they changed the economy to make it very simple, they changed from grain to cattle. They started producing animals instead of growing grain. And that created a lot of new industries, a lot of new communication from east to west in Europe. People were dying, but it also meant a new economic system in Western Europe and new possibilities, in spite of the fact that the plague came back again and again, every generation, but on a much lower level. And in that perspective, the corona epidemic today is nothing compared to earlier plagues. It's bad, of course, we should do something about it, but it is nothing compared to how it used to be in the Middle Ages and afterwards.